I used to laugh at him following 3 steps behind me, until the day those 3 steps saved my life. The crystal chandelier cast prismatic rainbows across the marble floor of the Blackwood estate, each fragment of light dancing like the cruel laughter that had echoed through these halls for weeks. Victoria Blackwood stood at the center of it all, resplendent in her deep emerald floral dress that cost more than most people made in a year, her long black hair cascading in perfect waves past her shoulders, soft bangs framing eyes that sparkled with mischief and malice in equal measure. "This is going to be absolutely hilarious," she whispered to her friend Melissa, her manicured fingers clutching a champagne flute as she watched a figure approach through the ornate French doors. "Daddy thinks I need protection after those silly threats. Watch me turn his paranoia into entertainment." The boy who entered looked like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. His clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, a button-down, shirt with sleeves slightly too long, pants that had seen better days, and shoes that had been polished until they gleamed despite their obvious age. His sandy brown hair was neatly combed, and his green eyes held a quiet intensity that seemed at odds with his humble appearance. "Miss Blackwood?" His voice was steady, respectful. "I'm Daniel Hayes. Your father hired me as your personal protection." "Detail!" Victoria nearly choked on her champagne, the sound transforming into delighted laughter that rang through the room like silver bells. "You? You're my bodyguard?" She circled him like a predator studying prey, her heels clicking against the marble. "Oh, this is rich. Daddy really outdid himself this time." Daniel stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, watching her with those unreadable eyes. He didn't flinch when she stepped closer, didn't react when she reached out to touch the fabric of his shirt with barely concealed disgust. "Tell me, bodyguard," she drawled, the word dripping with sarcasm. "What exactly are you going to protect me from? Harsh language? Someone stealing my parking spot?" Her friends giggled from their perch on the velvet sofa, cocktails in hand, treating the whole scene like dinner theater. "Anything that threatens your safety, Miss Blackwood," Daniel replied simply, his tone never changing, never rising to match. Her mockery. "How noble!" Victoria laughed, spinning away from him in a swirl of green silk. "Well then, protector, you can start by fetching my purse from upstairs. Then maybe you can iron my dresses. I'm sure you're experienced with domestic work." Something flickered across Daniel's face, so quick Victoria almost missed it, but he nodded, turning toward the staircase. "Of course, Miss Blackwood." For the next 3 weeks, Daniel Hayes became Victoria's shadow. He followed 3 steps behind her everywhere. To charity galas where she introduced him as my pet project, to shopping expeditions where she made him carry her bags while she tried on dresses worth more than his monthly rent, to exclusive clubs where she'd point him out to friends and laugh about her guard dog. Through it all, Daniel remained silent, professional, watchful. He opened doors, checked corners, scanned crowds with an intensity that Victoria found both amusing and slightly unnerving. Sometimes she'd catch him studying exit routes or positioning himself between her and groups of strangers, and she'd roll her eyes at what she saw as his theatrical commitment to the role. "You know you don't actually have to pretend to be competent," she told him one evening as they left the opera house, her arm linked through that of her date, a senator's son with wandering hands and empty conversation. "It's not like anyone actually wants to hurt me. The threats were probably from some jealous ex-boyfriend." Daniel had simply nodded, but Victoria noticed how his eyes never stopped moving, how he positioned himself to watch both the parking garage and the street, how his hand rested casually near his jacket in a way that suggested there might be something hidden there. The night everything changed started like any other. Victoria was attending the annual Blackwood Industries charity auction, a glittering affair held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. She wore her favorite emerald dress, the one that matched her eyes and made her feel invincible. untouchable. Daniel stood near the wall, virtually invisible in his simple, black suit, watching the crowd with that same quiet intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed across the room, "our next item is a rare painting by—" The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Victoria heard the sound that would haunt her dreams for months to come, the sharp crack of gunfire, followed by screams. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red shadows. She stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, champagne glass slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the floor, then strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her down behind an overturned table as bullets whined overhead. "Stay down." Daniel's voice was in her ear, no longer respectful or distant, but commanding, urgent. "Don't move until I tell you." Victoria's world, built on certainty and control, crumbled in that instant. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a joke. The boy she'd mocked for weeks was suddenly the only thing standing between her and death. His body curved protectively over hers as chaos erupted around them. Through the sound of breaking glass and panicked screams, she heard Daniel speaking into what must have been a hidden radio. "Shots fired at the Grand Metropolitan. Need immediate backup. Package is secure, but we need extraction now." Package. That's what she was to him. Not the spoiled princess who'd made his life hell, but something precious that needed protecting. As sirens wailed in the distance and Daniel guided her toward a service exit with practiced efficiency, Victoria realized that for the first time in her 23 years, someone was taking care of her. Not her money, not her father's influence, but her. The joke, it seemed, was on her after all. The safe house was nothing like Victoria had ever experienced. A modest apartment in a part of the city she'd never visited, where the wallpaper was faded and the furniture looked like it had been purchased from a second-hand store. She stood in the middle of the living room, still in her now-torn emerald dress, staring at Daniel as he moved with quiet efficiency, checking locks, drawing curtains, speaking in low tones to whoever was on the other end of his encrypted phone. "How long do we have to stay here?" she asked, her voice smaller than she'd intended. The arrogance that had sustained her for weeks felt hollow now, stripped away by the memory of bullets and screams. "Until we know who's targeting you and why," Daniel replied, hanging up the phone. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked directly at her. Not through her, not around her, but at her. "Are you hurt?" The question was so gentle, so genuinely concerned, that Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. No, I don't think so." She touched her cheek where a piece of flying glass had grazed her. "You saved me." Daniel's expression didn't change. "It's my job." "No," Victoria said firmly, surprising herself. "What you did back there, that wasn't just a job. You could have been killed." For 3 days, they lived in that strange limbo together. Victoria, who had never so much as made her own coffee, found herself watching Daniel prepare simple meals, tend to his equipment, maintain a vigilance that never seemed to waver. He slept in 2-hour intervals, always with one eye open, always, between her and the door. On the second night, Victoria found herself unable to sleep. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion mixed with fear she wasn't used to acknowledging. She wandered to the living room where Daniel sat in a chair facing the window, alert despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, his professional mask slipped. She saw exhaustion there and something else, concern that went beyond duty. "You should try to rest. Tomorrow we move to a more secure location." Victoria settled onto the couch, drawing her knees up to her chest. She was wearing one of his shirts over her pajamas, the first time in her life she'd worn borrowed clothes, and somehow it felt more comfortable than any designer gown. "Daniel, why do you really do this? Protect people, I mean." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I lost someone once. someone I couldn't protect. His voice was barely above a whisper. I swore I'd never let that happen again. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in Victoria's chest. I'm sorry. It wasn't your fault. No, I mean, I'm sorry for how I treated you. The jokes, the mockery. You didn't deserve that. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw a ghost of a smile cross his features. You were just being who you thought you needed to be. And who is that? Someone who doesn't need anybody, he said quietly. Someone who doesn't need protecting. The words hit her like a physical blow because they were so true. She'd spent her entire life building walls, using wealth and arrogance as armor against a world that only seemed to want her for what she could give them. But here was someone who had risked his life for her without expecting anything in return. On the fourth night after another day of near misses and close calls, Victoria finally broke. They were waiting in yet another safe house, this one even, smaller than the last, and the walls felt like they were closing in. Daniel was at his usual post by the window when she heard the sound that made her blood freeze, footsteps on the fire escape. Daniel, she whispered. He was moving before she finished saying his name, weapon drawn, pushing her toward the back room. Stay low. Stay quiet, he breathed against her ear. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Victoria huddled in the closet, listening to sounds that made no sense, shuffling, voices she didn't recognize, then silence. When Daniel finally came for her, there was blood on his shirt and exhaustion in his eyes that seemed to go soul deep. False. Alarm, he said, but Victoria could see the lie and the tension he carried in his shoulders. Just checking the building. That night, as they sat in the living room sharing a simple dinner of takeout food, Victoria found herself studying Daniel's profile in the lamplight. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe only a year or two older than her. But there was something ancient in his eyes, a weight that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. For those who've been following our stories of unexpected connections and life-changing moments, you know how powerful these bonds can be. If this resonates with you, subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of human connection and sacrifice. Tell me about your family, she said suddenly. Daniel paused, chopsticks halfway to his mouth. Not much to tell. Grew up in foster care. Joined the military young. This is what I know how to do. What about dreams? Things you want beyond this? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He set down his food, considering. I used to think about having a place. Nothing fancy, just somewhere that belonged to me. Maybe a dog. He smiled self-consciously. Sounds simple, I guess. It sounds perfect, Victoria said, and meant it. As the evening wore on, exhaustion finally began to win over adrenaline. Victoria found herself dozing against the arm of the couch, her head gradually sliding sideways. She was dimly aware of movement, of being gently repositioned, and then there was warmth and the steady rhythm of breathing. She woke hours later to find herself curled against Daniel's shoulder, his arm wrapped protectively around her. He was still awake, still watching, but when he realized she was conscious, he smiled. The first real smile she'd ever seen from him. Sorry, he said softly. You looked cold. Victoria didn't move away. Instead, she settled deeper against his, warmth, marveling at how safe she felt. Daniel? Thank you. For everything. His arm tightened slightly around her. Get some rest, Victoria. Tomorrow we figure out who wants you dead and why. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria wasn't thinking about the danger. She was thinking about the boy who'd started as a joke and somehow became her anchor, the steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, and the terrifying realization that she was falling for someone whose job it was to disappear from her life once the threat was over. Outside, the city slept. Inside, two people from different worlds held onto each other and pretended that morning would never come. The photograph slid across the table with a whisper of paper against wood, landing face up between Victoria's coffee cup and Daniel's tactical folder. Victoria's blood turned to ice as she stared at the image. Herself at 8 years old, gap-toothed, and grinning, standing next to a woman with kind eyes and Daniel's unmistakable features. "That's my mother," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Victoria look up sharply. "She worked as a maid in your house for 3 years when you were little." The safe house suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Victoria's mind raced backward, sifting through childhood memories she'd buried under years of privilege and entitlement. A gentle woman who'd bandaged scraped knees, who'd read bedtime stories when Victoria's parents were too busy with galas and bored. Meetings who'd disappeared one day without explanation. "Maria," Victoria whispered, the name surfacing from the depths of memory like a lifeline. "Her name was Maria Hayes." Daniel nodded, his green eyes never leaving her face. "She loved you like her own daughter. Used to come home and tell me stories. About the little girl with the green eyes who collected wounded birds and cried when flowers died." "What happened to her?" Victoria's voice was barely audible. "She found out about your father's business dealings, the real ones, not what he shows the world." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She tried to do the right thing, threatened to expose him. 2 weeks later, she died in a car accident that wasn't an accident." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You're saying my father. I'm saying your father has enemies because of the choices he's made. And now those enemies have decided you're the perfect way to hurt him." Daniel leaned forward, his voice urgent. "The attacks aren't random, Victoria. Someone wants you to suffer the way my mother suffered. They want your father to watch his daughter die the way I watched mine." Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the window, her whole world tilting on its axis. "So this whole time you've been, what? Planning revenge? Getting close to me so you could—" "No." The word came out sharp, definitive. Daniel was on his feet too, crossing the room in 2 strides. "I took this job because I wanted to understand who you'd become. I thought I'd find someone worth hating." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Victoria saw something raw and honest in Daniel's gaze that made her breath catch. "Instead, I found someone worth protecting," he said softly. "Someone who still cries when flowers die." Before Victoria could respond, Daniel's phone buzzed with an urgent alert. His expression shifted instantly back to professional focus as he read the message. "They've found us. We have maybe 10 minutes before this place is compromised." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of movement and fear. Daniel moved with lethal efficiency, gathering weapons and supplies while coordinating their extraction over encrypted channels. Victoria found herself following his lead without question, her trust in him absolute, despite the revelations that had shaken her world. They moved through the city like ghosts, using routes that avoided traffic cameras and staying in blind spots that Daniel seemed to know by instinct. But their pursuers were professional too, and by the time they reached the industrial warehouse that served as their final safe house, Victoria could see the exhaustion wearing at Daniel's edges. "How many are there?" she asked as Daniel checked his ammunition for what felt like the 100th time. "Too many," he replied grimly. "But I've called in every favor I have. Help is coming." "And if it doesn't come in time?" Daniel looked at her, then, and Victoria saw her answer in his eyes. He would die before he let anything happen to her. The boy who'd started this journey as a target of her cruel amusement had become her shield, her protector, her heart. "Daniel," she said, reaching for his hand. His fingers intertwined with hers, calloused and strong and warm. "Whatever happens, I need you to know that these past weeks, they've been the most real of my entire life. You've made me want to be better. Victoria. No, let me say this. Her green eyes blazed with an intensity that matched his own. I love you. Not the bodyguard, not the protector, you. The boy who reads poetry when he thinks no one is looking, who leaves food out for stray cats, who carries his mother's picture in his wallet and still believes in doing the right thing even when the world has been cruel to him. Daniel's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I love you too, he said simply. I love your terrible jokes and your stubborn streak and the way you pretend you don't care about things that matter to you. I love that you're nothing like I expected and everything I never knew I needed. They might have kissed then, might have had that perfect movie moment, but the sound of vehicles surrounding the warehouse shattered the silence. Daniel was immediately back in protection mode, positioning Victoria behind a steel support beam and checking his sight lines. Remember, he said, pressing a small pistol into her hands, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, Victoria said fiercely. We're getting out of this together. Daniel smiled, that same gentle smile that had been transforming her world piece by piece. Together, he agreed, but they both knew it was a lie. Through the dirty windows, Victoria could see muzzle flashes like deadly fireflies in the darkness. The final battle was about to begin, and despite all of Daniel's skills, all of his planning, all of his desperate love, the odds were not in their favor. As the warehouse doors exploded inward and masked figures poured through the breach, Daniel Hayes stepped forward to face impossible odds with nothing but his training, his weapons, and his unshakable determination to keep the woman he loved alive. The war for Victoria Blackwood's life had begun. The warehouse erupted in chaos as masked figures poured through every entrance, their weapons gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. Victoria pressed herself against the cold steel beam, her heart hammering so violently she was certain everyone could hear it over the gunfire. But all she could focus on was Daniel, moving like a force of nature between the shadows, taking down attackers with precision that spoke of training far beyond what any civilian bodyguard should possess. How many? She heard him speak into his comm device, his voice steady despite the bullets carving chunks from the concrete around them. The answer crackled back. 12 confirmed, possibly more. ETA on backup is 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Might as well have been 8 hours. Victoria watched Daniel's jaw tighten as he processed the same math she was doing. They were outnumbered 4-1, trapped in a building with limited cover and no escape routes. "Victoria!" Daniel called, softly, not taking his eyes off the advancing figures. "Remember what I taught you about breathing through fear?" She nodded, even though he couldn't see her, and forced herself to slow her racing heart. During their weeks in hiding, Daniel had shown her basic self-defense, not because he expected her to fight, but because he said fear could kill faster than any bullet if you let it control you. A spray of automatic gunfire forced Daniel to dive behind a shipping container, and Victoria saw him wince as concrete shrapnel caught his shoulder. Blood bloomed across his shirt, but he kept moving, kept firing, kept putting himself between her and death. "Daniel," she whispered, but he was already moving again. She watched him take down 2 more attackers, with movements so fluid they looked choreographed. But for everyone that fell, another seemed to take their place. And Victoria could see the toll it was taking. The slight hesitation in his step, the way he favored his left side, the grimness settling over his features as he realized what she already knew. They weren't going to make it out of this, not both of them. "Victoria!" Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind the far wall. When I give the signal, you run for it and you don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," she called back, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "Yes, you are." There was steel in his tone now, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This is not a debate." But Victoria had spent the last month learning that she was stronger than she'd ever known. The pampered princess, who'd hired Daniel as a joke, was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love meant fighting for what mattered, even when you were terrified. Especially when you were terrified. "Together or not at all," she said firmly, and saw Daniel's expression shift from professional determination to something that looked like pride mixed with exasperation. "You're going to get us both killed," he muttered, but Victoria caught the ghost of a smile. "Probably," she agreed, "but at least we'll die as ourselves." The next few minutes blurred into a nightmare of sound and motion. Daniel moved with desperate efficiency, but Victoria could see him slowing, could see the blood loss and exhaustion wearing him down. When she saw one of the attackers flanking his position, she didn't think. She just acted. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, and Victoria stared in shock at the smoking pistol in her hands. She'd never fired a weapon before this moment, but somehow her shot had found its mark. The attacker crumpled, and Daniel spun toward her with an expression of complete astonishment. "Nice shot," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her chest swell with fierce pride. But their brief moment of triumph was shattered when the lights went out. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and Victoria lost sight of Daniel in the chaos. She heard him calling her name, heard the sound of hand-to-hand combat, heard things that made her stomach clench with fear. Then strong hands grabbed her from behind, and she was looking into cold eyes behind a black mask. "Victoria Blackwood." The voice was mechanically distorted. "Your father's sins finally come home to roost. Let her go." Daniel's voice cut through, the darkness like a blade. Victoria turned to see him standing 10 feet away, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his weapon trained on her captor. But there were 3 more guns pointed at him, and everyone in the room knew he was out of options. "The Great Protector," the masked figure laughed. "Do you know who I am, boy?" Daniel's eyes never wavered. "Someone who's about to die. I am Marcus Chen. 20 years ago, your precious Victoria's father destroyed my family's business, had my brother framed for embezzlement. My brother died in prison, and my family lost everything." The grip on Victoria tightened. "Tonight, Richard Blackwood learns what it feels like to lose everything." "It wasn't me," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the gun pressed against her temple. "I was a child." "Sins of the father," Chen replied coldly. "Besides, I've been watching you for months. The spoiled princess who treats people like toys. Maybe the world will be better off without another Blackwood." "You're right," Victoria said quietly, and felt Daniel tense. "I was spoiled. I was cruel. I treated people terribly because I thought their feelings didn't matter." She looked directly at Daniel, pouring everything she felt into her gaze. "But someone taught me better. Someone showed me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." "How touching," Chen sneered. "Your bodyguard can watch you die knowing he failed." "He didn't fail," Victoria said firmly. "He saved me in every way that matters." She saw understanding flash in Daniel's eyes a split second before she acted. Victoria had been raised in privilege, but she'd also been raised around horses, had learned to move quickly when 1,000-pound animals got spooked. She dropped her full weight downward, slipping from Chen's grip just as Daniel moved. The next few seconds happened so fast Victoria's mind could barely process them. Daniel was a blur of motion, taking down 2 attackers before Chen could adjust his aim. But the third gunman had a clear shot, and Victoria watched in horror as his finger tightened on the trigger. Time slowed to a crawl as Daniel threw himself forward, his body intercepting the bullet meant for her. The sound of the impact was somehow both soft and final, and Victoria screamed as Daniel crumpled to the concrete floor. What happened next felt like something from outside herself. Victoria snatched up Daniel's fallen weapon and fired with a precision that surprised everyone, including herself. When the smoke cleared, Marcus Chen and his remaining men lay still, and the warehouse fell silent except for the sound of approaching sirens. But Victoria only had eyes for Daniel, lying motionless, in a spreading pool of blood, his green eyes staring at nothing. Victoria's hands shook as she pressed them against the wound in Daniel's chest, crimson seeping between her fingers like spilled wine on white silk. His breathing was shallow, labored, but his eyes were still focused on her face with that same intensity that had captivated her from the beginning. "Hey," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of sirens growing closer. "You did good back there. I'm proud of you." "Don't!" Victoria's voice broke. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me, Daniel Hayes. We had a deal. Together or—" "Not at all." A ghost of his gentle smile crossed Daniel's lips. "Some promises are harder to keep than others." "The medics are coming," Victoria said desperately, looking toward the warehouse entrance where red and blue lights were painting the walls in urgent colors. "You just have to hold on a little longer. You can do that, right? You can do anything." Daniel's hand found hers, his fingers surprisingly warm despite everything. "Victoria, I need you to know something. Save your strength. No, listen to me." There was urgency in his voice that made her focus completely on his words. "These past weeks, they weren't just about protecting you. They were about discovering who I could be when someone believed in me. You gave me that gift." Tears streamed down Victoria's face, dropping onto their joined hands. "You gave me everything. You showed me what it means to be loved for who I really am, not what I have or what I can give someone." The paramedics burst through the warehouse doors like a cavalry charge, their equipment and urgent voices filling the space. Victoria found herself pushed aside as they worked over Daniel, their medical jargon creating a wall between her and the boy who'd become her whole world. "We've got a pulse, but it's weak," she heard one of them say. "Multiple GSWs, significant blood loss. We need to move now." Victoria tried to follow as they loaded Daniel onto a stretcher, but a police officer gently held her back. "Ma'am, you need to let them work. Is there someone we can call for you?" She wanted to say Daniel was the only person she needed, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she watched helplessly as the ambulance disappeared into the night, taking with it the boy who'd taught her that love wasn't about ownership or control, but about sacrifice and seeing the best in another person even when they couldn't see it themselves. The hospital waiting room became Victoria's world for the next 18 hours. She sat in the same plastic chair, still wearing her blood-stained clothes, refusing food and comfort, and the endless parade of people who wanted to debrief her, interview her, or simply satisfy their curiosity about the Blackwood heiress who'd been found in a warehouse surrounded by bodies. Her father arrived at dawn, still in his pajamas, his usually perfect appearance disheveled with panic. "Victoria, thank God you're safe." He wrapped her in arms that felt foreign after weeks of Daniel's protective embrace. "I came as soon as I heard." "Did you know?" Victoria asked quietly, not moving away from him but not returning the embrace either. "About Maria Hayes? About what really happened to her?" Richard Blackwood went very still. "Victoria, did you know?" she repeated, and something in her voice made several people in the waiting room look their way. Her father's silence was answer enough. Victoria pulled away from him, feeling something fundamental shift in her chest. "She loved me," she said, her voice stronger now. "Maria loved me like I was her own daughter, and you had her killed because she threatened your business. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Victoria stood, and for the first time in her life, she looked at her father and saw him clearly, not as the powerful man who'd given her everything, but as someone who'd taken away the people who mattered most. Her son is in there fighting for his life because of choices you made 20 years ago. Victoria, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that Daniel Hayes is a better man than you'll ever be, Victoria said. Firmly, I understand that he risked everything to protect me, not because of what I could give him, but because he loves me. And I understand that I'm done being your daughter if it means being part of a family built on other people's pain. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge burning irreversible and final. Richard Blackwood opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a doctor in surgical scrubs approached them. Miss Blackwood, I have an update on Mr. Hayes. Victoria's heart stopped beating. She could tell from the doctor's expression, from the careful way he was choosing his words, from the heaviness in the air around them. He didn't make it, she said, not a question but a statement of the truth she could feel settling into her bones like winter. I'm sorry, the doctor said gently. We did everything we could. The blood loss was too extensive, and there were complications during surgery. He went peacefully, and he asked me to give you this. The doctor held out a small piece of paper, folded carefully. Victoria took it with hands that no longer felt like they belonged to her and slowly opened what would be Daniel's final words to her. Victoria, if you're reading this, then I kept my promise. You're safe, and that's all that matters to me. Don't let this make you hard again. Don't let it make you forget that you're capable of love and kindness and making the world better just by being in it. Live the life I couldn't give you, and maybe plant some flowers for me. I'll be watching over you always. Victoria read the note 3 times before the words truly sank in, before the reality of a world without Daniel Hayes became something she had to learn to navigate. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her pocket, next to her heart, where it would stay for the rest of her life. The funeral was small, held in the church where Maria Hayes had once prayed for her son's safety. Victoria sat in the front pew, wearing simple black instead of designer clothing, her face bare of makeup and her hair pulled back in a ponytail that Daniel would have recognized. She'd written a eulogy, but when the time came to speak, she found she couldn't reduce Daniel Hayes to words. Instead, she stood at the podium and said simply, Daniel taught me that love isn't about what someone can do for you. It's about who you become because they believed in you. He saved my life in every way a person can be saved. And if there's any justice in this world, he knows that he succeeded. After the service, Victoria walked to Daniel's grave alone. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the fresh dirt. Nothing expensive or elaborate, just simple flowers that reminded her of the boy who'd read poetry when he thought no one was looking. I'm going to be better, she whispered to the headstone that bore his name and the dates that seemed impossibly short for a life that had changed everything. I'm going to use the money for good things, help people the way you helped me. I'm going to make you proud. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, and Victoria chose to believe it was Daniel's way of saying he already was. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the lobby of the Maria Hayes Foundation for At-Risk Youth, watching teenagers who reminded her of a young Daniel learn job skills and discover their own worth. She'd sold the family estate, cut ties with her father's business empire, and built something new from the ashes of her old life. She thought about Daniel every day, not with the crushing grief that had nearly destroyed her in the beginning, but with gratitude for the gift he'd given her. He'd shown her that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be, that love was worth any sacrifice, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for victory, but simply to protect what mattered most. Victoria Blackwood had been a joke that became a love story, that became a tragedy, that became a legacy. And in the end, perhaps that was the most powerful transformation of all. Love isn't measured in time. It's measured in how completely it changes you. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing. We post powerful real-life stories every day that explore the depths of human connection, the courage to change, and the lasting impact of love that transcends even loss.